Because a kulak, a rich peasant, can always stop being a kulak. All they have to do is give up all their wealth and join a collective farm. But a Jew, or a black, or an Asian, or a Japanese can never stop being, right, Jewish, if the term is ethnically, right? And so again, this is one of the fundamental distinctions that separates the Soviet Union and its political genocide, if we're going to accept such a ridiculous term, from the Holocaust or the ethnic genocide of Nazi Germany. Does that?
Yeah, I mean, that's sufficient. The next thing I would say, too, is that maybe if you want to this is a question for you to answer, but what's the worst way to get on Stalin's bad side?
Oh,
because that's good stories.
Yeah, again, I would, if you're interested, it's a terrible, terrible biography, politically speaking. It's just devoid of context. But if you're interested in knowing about Stalin the person, In the Court of the Red Tsar is really good for that. People would ask Stalin favors. The very easiest way to get Stalin very angry and disgusted with you would be to ask for a personal favor. Molotov, right, who was the foreign minister, his wife actually came under suspicion, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she was in prison. So you have inter-party leadership being in prison, and they knew not to ask Stalin for a favor, not to ask Stalin to, pull some strings. There was nothing he hated more than personal favors being done in the political realm. And so, again, this doesn't speak to the historical or philosophical or theoretical aspect, but this notion of Stalinism, right, is again not about personal power. It's not about personal caprice, personal whim, or ego, right, egotism. And ironically, if you want a relatively balanced biography of Stalin, I highly recommend relatively balanced. Isaac Dutcher's Stalin, A Political Biography. And Isaac Dutcher is actually a Trotskyist, but he manages to put aside most of his vitriol and give a fairly good view of Stalin. So, does that?
Well, I was actually going to say if you talked about his son during the war.
Oh, yeah, this is another thing. Stalin's son, eldest son, was a pilot and got shot down and captured by the Germans. And they actually offered to exchange his son for a German general. And he said, "You have 1,000,000 of my sons. And if you're not going to release all of them, then I cannot ask for you to just release one." And in fact, his son later died in a Nazi prison camp. I believe he walked into an electric fence because he was so distraught that his father wouldn't trade a high-ranking general for him. But again, we're not dealing with personal interest. We're not dealing with egotism. We're not dealing for someone who wants personal benefits or an easy life or just mad power and luxury, right? We have a Marxist-Leninist thrown into a historical situation where they do the best they can with the resources they have and the knowledge they have.
Does anybody have any further questions for Greg?
Yes.
Yeah.
First of all, just like a comment on the World War II, like the Soviet Union winning World War II, but I agree completely. Like you look at the casualties, and the Soviet Union has a fair deal more than the rest of the Allies combined.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty massive. And then, just again, back to the purges, what was the trial like, if there was a trial?
They were almost, this varied. There were two main ways of having a trial. There was the general process of the trial, which were under the troikas. And a troika, like most revolutionary tribunals, were just that, tribunals. So generally speaking, there were 3 members. Any member, I believe any member could withhold the verdict. Either it was a majority rule or one member could veto the other 2 members. I'd have to look into that. But the troika would basically decide on a case. Sometimes they would deliberate for quite some time. Oftentimes it was a matter of minutes. If the troika came into a Kulak farmhouse and there were gold inlays on a grandfather clock and there was a barn full of slaughtered cattle, right, and burned fields, it was very easy for them to make their decision, which would almost usually be carried out on the spot as a form of execution. More difficult cases would go weeks or months. And the most famous Stalinist trials are the show trials. Right? This is what most people refer to as the travesty of justice. Interestingly enough, a really good philosophical defense, probably the best philosophical defense of Stalinism, comes from those very authoritarian, anti-individualistic French existentialists. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who again, French existentialist, has a book called Humanism and Terror. Or no, I'm sorry, Communism and Terror.
No, it's Humanism and Terror.
Is it Humanism and Terror? Okay, it's been a while since I read it. But in it, he actually gives a long philosophical defense of, an existential philosophical defense of Stalinism. And one of these things is, the show trials are only a show trial if you don't understand what you're looking for. For example, Bukharin is asked if he is forming a plot, or Zinoviev is asked if he's forming a plot with the Trotskyists to overthrow the Soviet government. Right? It's a ridiculous claim if it's taken simply as that. Are you actively plotting to overthrow the government? Zinoviev, old Bolshevik, of course says no. But then there's a question, were you contacted by people who attempted to overthrow the Soviet government? And he says yes. And they said, well, did you turn them in? He said, no, I didn't turn them in. Well, then by not turning them in, didn't you objectively serve to overthrow, to attempt to overthrow, right, the Soviet government? And of course he says, yes, I did. So you have people confessing. It's very interesting. The things that they are resistant to is subjective guilt. You'll find very few of those old Bolsheviks admitting to subjective guilt in the sense that, yes, I actively worked with the fascists, like saying this just right out of the blue. I actively worked with the fascists. But what you'll see is a line of reasoning, which is, yes, I was contacted with people who would work with the fascists. No, I did not turn them in. Right? And so given the existential conditions, right, the threat of invasion by fascists, right, and a restoration of capitalism or fascism in the Soviet Union, right, the show trials are actually basically one of the best examples of existentialism in practice that one can have. And I personally take this line, which many people don't share, is I believe that the old Bolsheviks were genuine communists. As a matter of fact, they believe in the victory of the proletariat. They had served the Soviet Union to the best of their abilities. They had a subjective intention to spread worldwide communism. They had a subjective intention to support the Soviet Union. But nevertheless, had Bukharin been successful in overthrowing Stalin, right, and defending the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany, then Bukharin would be justified. But the very fact that he comes to trial, the very fact that the power is weak enough to not overthrow Stalin, only serves to weaken the Soviet Union, objectively speaking, regardless of anyone's individual attention or intentions. And so in this sense, right, taking responsibility does not mean taking responsibility in the sense of one's intentions. Well, I never meant to do this, right? And so I think the old Bolsheviks are actually quite courageous in that they're willing to take responsibility. They are willing to take responsibility for their objective failures, but, and again, they should be congratulated for this, they are fiercely unwilling to take responsibility for subjective failures, right? They refuse to admit that they talked with a German agent, or they talked with, a fascist, and talked to institute fascism. But they did talk to someone who was willing to work with the Germans, and thus did objectively help, right, Nazi Germany. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Any additional questions? Okay, well, unless there's any last ones, I guess we'll call this to a close.
All right, let's give Greg a hand.